Well, Germany is facing a dark winter as energy costs exploding right now. Nuclear power plants offline. So, what is Germany going to do as we head into this very dark winter? We see Germans now also buying hundreds of thousands of space heaters because gas might not be available. It's going to be a long, cold winter. We have a guest on the show, Ralph Schoellhammer. He is a journalist, academic who's been covering this energy crisis across Europe. He's been covering the Dutch farmer revolt as well. And he joins us now to talk all about that and more. First, news of the day. I want to talk about what's going on in Germany, the current state of affairs. Germany facing a dark winter. Energy costs exploding, nuclear power plants turned off, although there seems to be concessions on that piece. Germans are told they need to turn down their heaters because this is how you support Ukraine at the end of the day. And if you complain about it, then you're a dissenter. you're not worthy. And you just wrote a really great piece about this. And I wanted to get your take on where things stand today. What is Germany planning to do as we head into this dark winter?
To be honest, I think they're not planning much, right? At least when it comes to addressing the structural problems at the bottom. You just mentioned correctly, there was a Wall Street Journal article just about 24 hours ago where they claimed, or what the Wall Street Journal claimed, that there is a turnaround when it comes to the three last remaining nuclear power plants in Germany, that they will continue at least into the year 2023. But now it turned out immediately after that article was dropped, the German climate ministry denied it in its entirety. They say there is no factual basis for the assumption that these nuclear power plants will continue to operate. They say, maybe there's a little bit of a concession. They say they are still kind of stress testing them. But even that is a little bit weird because the German Technical Union, who kind of does all these they check the kind of equipment, they see whether or not it's still up to date, if it can still run. And they said, well, the nuclear power plants are in excellent technical condition. They're old, and we might have to talk about this as well, right? They were built in the 1960s and 1970s. So this was the last period when Germany could still build nuclear power plants. But despite their age, they are still fully functional. So the decision kind of to turn them off or not to continue them running is a purely political decision. And the background of this political decision, I would argue, is purely ideological. Right? The German government, by the way, also the quote unquote conservative government under Angela Merkel, they dedicated themselves to, move Germany out of the nuclear age. And kind of we now see the results of this, because the dirty secret in the background was, sure, we don't use nuclear, right? Sure, we don't use fracking in Germany, something we can touch on as well. But they just imported everything from Russia, right? Kind of hoping that this card they played under the table will never be a larger problem. And now we see with the war in Ukraine that the problematic nature of this policy is fully revealed.
You write about an attack on nuclear. We've been obviously seeing what's been happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, 6 reactors. The United States largely responsible for allowing HIMARS to be targeting, and that's the latest part of this story, targeting this nuclear power plant, which to my mind, what I've been saying here on the show is a war crime. The West is largely quiet on this issue. Nuclear is actually the least dangerous energy available, and yet Germany aimed to take it down while Russia is beginning to lead in nuclear energy. So there is this shift away from fossil fuels and demonization of nuclear that we keep hearing about. You've even had Elon Musk coming out and trying to get rid of this myth that nuclear that we should be demonizing nuclear power, right?
Yes, no, I think that's correct. And I think you can almost put a timestamp on when it happened. Kind of the green movement in Europe that then also, I would argue, gradually spilled over into the United States. The environmental movement that is particularly hostile to fossil fuels and to nuclear energy, that really started to emerge in the late 60s and early 70s. So it's what we would call, you see it a little bit also, if you remember, the hippie movement, right? Kind of that they wanted to live in communes and, kind of in sync with nature, all these ideas that are, in hindsight, it's easy to mock them. But of course, they did have an impact as these people were gradually marching through political and societal institutions, that these ideas became much more powerful. I think that we that we believed originally, right? The idea was always that rationality or kind of the obvious will be victorious in the end. And as you just correctly mentioned, in many ways, nuclear energy would have been the obvious solution to many problems. But if there is a huge ideological barrier, a quasi, I would almost say, religious barrier to it, then this is very, very difficult to overcome. And this is exactly, I think, what we see happening in this area.
We've seen a number of protests over the past few weeks in Germany. And today, this is an amazing story, an interview with a German news outlet, NT. We have the interior minister of Germany basically saying anybody who's protesting, whether it was lockdowns or mandates, and now he says, having to turn down your thermostat, an energy crisis, that you are an enemy of the state. You are an extremist. Yes. This is crazy.
And this was you said it perfectly, right? This was really kind of a Staatsfeind, to use the German word. So this is really a terminology in that way. We have last heard in Eastern Germany, right, in the German Democratic Republic, so in communist Germany, if you want, and of course also in a much darker time in Germany during the fascist time in Germany. So you're absolutely right. This is, again, I'm not saying that these are the same things, but you see again the shift in the conversation, exactly what you just said. So they know that their policy of the past is about to run against a brick wall. So what you now see preemptively happening is to denounce everyone who is going to protest against it as an enemy of the state, who most likely is in cahoots with right-wing extremists, which is, again, kind of, I guess we would say in the United States, we would say is basically dog whistles to say, right-wing extremists equals, Nazis. So this is exactly the direction which this is going. So everybody, or the second great insult that is now being spread to Germany, it means you are secretly a supporter of Putin and the war against Ukraine. So they're already kind of preemptively trying to diminish any possible criticism that aim at the consequences of these failed policies in the past. So this is really, the dark times, as I said before, they're probably just about to come. We have not reached the peak of this.
No, not even close. It seems like we're maybe months away from maybe more widespread awareness of this, which I guess kind of gets to the heart of this question. Why do you think the Western media is largely ignoring this story?
My theory about this is kind of what we talked about a couple of seconds ago, is because most of the modern journalists have been recruited from particular that ideological cultural environment, right, that is responsible in large part for this turn against fossil fuels, from this turn against nuclear energy in the first place. We have very good polls both in Austria and Germany, right, where they ask journalists whom would they vote for. And it's about, I think in Germany it's 40% would vote for the Greens, 30% would vote for the Social Democrats, 20% for the Liberals, and maybe the remaining 10% would vote for Conservatives. So it is absolutely clear where journalism, I think the same is true for the United States as well, where they stand ideologically. And as you probably know, right, as both of us know, once you dedicate yourself to an ideology, you have a real problem with anything in reality that would run counter to it, that would run against it. So you can either try to, find ways to explain it away, and if that is not working, you ignore it, right? I think this is what we see when we later also talk about the protests, whether it's the Dutch farmers or in other areas of Europe as well. You simply stop reporting about it, right? It's right. It's not happening.
It's gone completely silent. Certainly on the Dutch side, we've been covering it on our show. But it's almost impossible to really find. You can't find it on the BBC's website. It's buried. You're just not going to find this coverage. And a lot of this. Go ahead, Ralph.
No, just real quick, because to the point you made before, right? And then you have people like George Monbiot going on. I think it was either the BBC or the Guardian, where he says, "Well, we just have to accept that milk, eggs, and meat, that was a luxury in the past, and we can no longer afford this in the future." Right? It's kind of this again quasi-religious idea. Now comes the dark time of where we have to forgo all the small pleasures of the past, when we know, and I know we're going to talk about this more, we have all the technical possibilities to allow people to, maybe not in abundance, but to continue the kind of consumption we have now, to what I would call, and this is always my big thing, which are the small pleasures for, the lower middle class, the working class, the people for whom it matters if a gallon of milk costs $1, $3, or $5. So it's easy for the, quote unquote, well-funded intellectual to say, well, we can no longer afford milk, because we all know that he's able to afford it, right? He will still have his milk when he wants it, but everybody else, well, they will have to find alternatives. And this is, I think, the bothersome thing here. It's the burden for these ideological goals, and that makes it so bothersome, right? If they would be true to their ideology and kind of also accept the suffering that would come with it themselves, I think then we can have a discussion about it. But it's always shifted to others. I mean, take the best example. You have John Kerry using a private jet to fly to Greenland and accept an environmental award. And when a journalist, honor where honor is due, right, has the guts to ask him, well, doesn't this seem a little weird? He says, well, everything I do for the climate, it entitles me to use a private jet. But, you know, the average American or the average European who maybe once a year wants to take a flight and visit a relative or go on vacation, well, this is something we can no longer afford.
Right, and this is a crisis of our own making, and of course it adversely affects the poor. You write about this in your piece multiple times. You talk about how, you know, the extensive energy use this year in Germany, in Europe, and how this will disproportionately affect the poor. Can you talk more about that, maybe elaborating more on this particular piece of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give you one example, right, there are already discussions in some European countries that they say, well, maybe we have to close schools over the winter to save heating costs, right? Kind of to bring down the gas usage in public buildings, of which schools, of course, would in many cases be part of.
And that would be great. We saw that during the lockdowns. It didn't affect children at all, right? I mean, test scores are through the roof with lockdown. I mean, give me a break. We're seeing the reverberations of 2 years of lockdowns and what this did to children, right? So yeah, now we can't heat these schools. Let's lock them down again. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just infuriating.
No, you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. And take the second example. Right, we live in this, and this I think is not discussed enough. I know that Malcolm Gladwell got a little bit of blowback on this issue, but I think we don't discuss this enough. There is a group of people, and I'll be completely honest, I think you and I are probably part of that group of people. We can pretty much work from everywhere, right? As long as we have broadband, a camera, and a keyboard, we can do our job. So for us, high gas prices, we can kind of avoid the fallout because we don't have to commute. But you know, the security guard, the waiter, right? People that actually have to go to the workplace and very often have to live further away from the workplace because they cannot afford to live nearby. They have to commute. So again, they are the ones, this is always the German thing and the Austrian thing, like they say, well, why can't they use their bicycle? Well, sure, and I'm serious there, but that's really the argument. To say, well, they can ride a bike. Okay, fine, maybe in May, maybe in June. November and December, it's really not comfortable in the winter in Europe to ride your bike, particularly in Central Europe. Yeah. But it's easy because the people who promote this don't have to do it.
Yeah, ride your bike through the Alps in January, and see how that works out for you. I mean, the same thing is happening in the United States. We saw this with President Biden. We saw this with Democrats pushing this green energy package, this inflation reduction package, which was a huge boondoggle for the green energy companies. And the argument is, well, I can't believe that you're still driving a gas-powered car. Like, why haven't you bought an electric car, even though the average cost of them is $55,000, $65,000? What's wrong with you? You just haven't shelled out $55,000 for an electric vehicle. What's wrong with you people?
Yeah, and if you allow me to add something a little bit provocative, and what's so bothersome is this, because in so many ways, I feel this resembles the Europe of old, right? Where you had the kind of pre-revolutionary Europe, where you had the old aristocratic class that was in some parts entirely detached from the rest of the population, which then often caused revolutions. And I feel in a way we are in a similar situation when you hear, and I think that's true in Europe, but it's also true in the United States, particularly in the current government, when you hear politicians talk, right, whether it's the energy minister Granholm or Pete Buttigieg, and exactly as you say, they say, well, if people would just drive an electric car, they would not have these problems. You have to ask yourself, in which reality are those people living? And it's exactly this. These are two completely different classes that barely have any connection anymore. And this is I think, very, very dangerous on the long run for any democratic system.
According to a report out this morning, Germany could be facing blackouts and a collapse of the power grid this winter after citizens have started buying up electric heaters. Of course, fears that, of course, gas is going to be cut off. And now you're hearing from public utility companies saying this is going to be a disaster because if electric heaters are plugged in simultaneously when temperatures fall, it could cause a massive overload because they use between 1,000 and 3,000 watts of energy. And if everyone switched on a fan or a heater in their home, it would mean that they would almost have to double the existing network structure on every street in Germany. So hundreds of thousands of electric heaters are being purchased in Germany. 600,000 of them were purchased in the first half of this year, Ralph. That's crazy.
No, in the German case, we can only hope that it's going to be a very, very mild winter, right? This is kind of the last hope that there is. If it's a mild winter, if it's not going to be a cold winter, they probably can make it through. But if it should be a truly cold Central European winter, this is going to be a problem. And we still don't know. This is also the big question mark. What the Russians are going to do. There is still this possibility, right, that there might be a settlement in the war in Ukraine and that things kind of return to the pre-war status in October or November. And then these symptoms of larger problems will again start to go away because gas will start to flow. But we don't know this. But I think this is also what you see in German behavior a little bit at the moment, which in a certain sense, I don't necessarily find morally entirely worth of approval, but it makes a lot of sense politically, right? That there is hope on part of the Germans that this war is just going to end, independently of who's quote unquote winning. It's just to have it being done with and to reinstall the flows of energy, because as you just mentioned, the German system, German infrastructure that is heavily underinvested, is simply not prepared for such a crisis.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. I love this discussion. I could continue it, and I'd love to have you back on here. My guest is Ralph Schoellhammer, again, journalist / academic. You can read his great writings. Follow him on Twitter. We really appreciate you being here on the show, Ralph. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the time. It was fantastic being on with you.